I think it blooms in profusion every other year, so this must not be its year to do its big bloom. Maybe 10 years or so ago, there was a big windstorm and a straight line wind, and we lost about like 100 trees in the garden. And this tree lost like half of its crown, just fell down. The seeds were brought by the explorer Michaud from Kentucky coffee tree, and it was planted here, so it's over 200 years old. It composts itself. So like you can see in this, like it's actually decaying, and then it's growing in its decay, which is, I think, says a lot for our times in terms of hope. Like decaying, but still alive. There's good energy in the land here. The land slopes down to the Schuylkill, and we're right at the difference between the Piedmont and the coastal plain. So there's a fall line with these rocks, and then the coastal plain goes across through South Philadelphia and through New Jersey. And actually this hill that we're on that sort of slopes up is a giant sand dune. Like you wouldn't know, so we got geothermal heat, and like after they went 6 feet down, it was all sand. So they had to get some special thing to like do the geothermal drillings because of all of this sand. So we're on the giant sand dune, and he was a plant explorer. He was a plant capitalist actually, but he would collect all these specimens, and then because of all the microclimates and all the different soil, it was like a museum of plants. And so you would have like more traditional gardens which were designed in a certain way, but for him it was more specimens and matching specimens to the land. And because of the nature of this land and its slope and the soil types and these microclimates, he could grow. And because where we are in Pennsylvania is sort of the northernmost area for southern plants and the southernmost area for northern plants, like there was this incredible diversity of bringing seeds and things that he had, acquired on these various travels through up and down the east coast of North America in the 18th century and brought here. And then many of which were propagated and then used to create 18th century gardens is the plant trade. So that's the capitalism part. But originally these were lands of the Lenni Lenape people. And when we go down to the farm, I can show you, but like it used to be beyond this area that it was all marshland. And so it was lands that people, indigenous people would use seasonally for hunting and fishing and gathering in the marshes, but which are like incredibly rich with biodiversity. And so a lot of that has been filled, and now we're around this giant refinery post-industrial landscape. So we're this sort of little haven in the middle of a lot of really environmentally toxic, systemic poverty, setting. But in that, we're trying to make these connections with our community so that everyone feels welcome here. This is a pomegranate tree. Oh, really? It doesn't actually fruit, but it makes these really beautiful red flowers. So this is a pomegranate, and this boxwood was all propagated. This is all, these are boxwoods grown into trees. They were, border plants in 18th century gardens. Oh, wow. And so you would trim them into these little hedges. But that's what happens when the boxwood becomes several hundred years old and turns into a tree. And so these are cuttings from the boxwoods. This is my balance place. This is where this is where I stay. Yes, this is the real world. Oh, look, it's so sweet. Oh my goodness, it's a little fungi. Oh, that's great. Yeah. Be like the fungi. Underground mycelia. This space is a crossroads of people from all over. So that people come here internationally because of, who created the space and the reputation. There's some book, Outlander, there's like an Outlander book, and people come here for that because it's an Outlander book. But then Philadelphians come here. We're like this refuge, and from all different, ours, the zip code in which we're set is one of the most economically diverse zip codes. And now, but we're also dealing with development pressure and gentrification and displacement, and how to both advocate for our neighbors that have always been here and maybe not always felt welcome. Yeah. So there are these beings, right? Like and I think that's one of the things that has hit me so much as we're being in this lockdown moment is like the natural world and the power of the natural world and the power of the other living beings that are not human in this world, right? Like we talk about nature and our, tree relatives and plant, there is this nature and there is a power, a life force in all of this. And so we're not alone as human beings struggling against this system that's being put in place. We actually do have other beings in the world that are like on the side of life, which is what we're in the real world, if we remember that. Like if we can get out in the real world and remember that.
So for example, like this tree, what is this tree doing in terms of the economy? I mean, how is it really contributing? I mean,
but see, I wouldn't want to put a value on. Like,
I'm joking. I'm being sarcastic. Like everything needs to be justified in terms of money.
No, it's not a carbon credit. I'm not putting a carbon credit on any of this. I'm not putting my mental health credit on this tree. They're like our relatives. We should care for them because we're all connected in this web of relationships. I mean, this whole space, if you look at the overstory and the understory and the perennials, in this space, in the sky and on the ground, like you can feel the connection. Can we walk down to the river? You can hear all the birds. We're one of the happiest bird places. We have bald eagles fly over, lots of raptors. The bald eagles are the fishing hawks too, so they fish on the river. I mean, not regularly, it's not like you see them every day, but you do see them. We're on a flight path of a lot of migratory birds. So, let's go look at the pitcher plants. Someone was asking me, I posted about the pitcher plants earlier. I never knew they bloomed, right? They have the most amazing blossoms. John Bartram, the Bartrams explored the pine barrens of New Jersey and all of these bog plants that were part of the pine barrens ecosystem. Because they need to be pollinated, but they also eat bugs. So how do you create a structure that will allow you to be pollinated while not eating the thing that's pollinating you, right? Actually, maybe there's like a good illusion in this, a metaphor in the pitcher plants, because how they work is that these are dried up, these little tubes, but there are these structures that the little insects go down. These are growing new ones for the new season, and these tubes are open, and there's a little hood that kind of tempts them in, and then there are all of these little hairs inside the tubes that go one way. It's kind of like when you drive out of the airport rental car garage, like don't back up. Once they start going down, they can't get back out, and then it goes all the way to the bottom, and at the bottom there's a little bit of water, digestive juices, and it digests them, and it like self-composts, because these plants grow in the pine barrens, which is, I believe, acidic, so they need the counterbalance, so they self-compost the insects. So they eat them, but they don't actually eat them, they sort of internally compost them. But then these are the structures of the, to pollinate, and they're just, I mean, architecturally, it's almost like Dr. Seuss, like science fiction. You can't imagine such a beautiful thing. And then these are little cranberry flowers. So these are, and the Venus flytrap. There's a few Venus flytraps down here. And this is a box, so Bartram would ship plants to England in these wooden boxes on ships. So, and this you can kind of see the pitcher structures more easily, like this one has water in it. And you can see the little baby hairs going down, like that little ant's not gonna be in a good spot if it keeps going. It will slide down and go down and be composted. They don't bloom for very long, so this is like a super treat to actually see them blooming. But I mean, I guess what I'm thinking about metaphorically is that, for so many people, we're sort of sleepwalking in this moment of, you know, sliding with the hairs in this one direction. We're being like nudged, and we not even know that we're being nudged, like down, down, down. And then eventually we're going to get past the point of no return, and we're not going to be able to climb back out, and we will be composted into the Borg, the cyborg
well,
pitcher
and the
plant.
difference is though, like this is like a natural process, and like what are all of the
That
inputs?
is true.
What are the inputs that are involved with all the stuff that's going on right here?
Right.
Versus
I mean, it's a complex.
this like artificial, these artificial inputs where we think we can replace nature. You know, we can break it down into its parts, and then own it and replace it.
Yeah. I mean, in one sense, and this is the thing about this garden, is that like it is in a container, right? Like, so this is not in its native habitat, and in that way, it is somewhat out of its nature of where it would be in the pinelands. And yeah, it is nature, and I think what a lot of these mechanical people, like, they take nature and they say, oh, this is how it operates. Now we'll make a replica, or we'll base our design off these natural systems, but they're not nature. And this is part of a life cycle, right? Like it emerges, it has its life cycle, it participates, it consumes, it is consumed, and then it starts again. And you can see the water on this, like we had a rain today, and it's all part of the water cycle. We're here on the Schuylkill watershed that flows into the Delaware, and we're all part of this water, right? Like, we understand where the water that I'll show you later, we're across from these refineries, we're across from industry that's really done terrible things to water. And so we're all connected in that way, all of our beings, to the water and to the plants, and it's a gift. Robin Wall Kimmerer had said this lovely thing, to know what your gift is and how to give it, and so the natural world gives us gifts, and then we have to know how to, in exchange, gift back. And this is a solution, because this plant was growing in a place that it was not able to acquire enough nutrients in the soil where it grew, and so it adapted to access the nutrients that it needed to survive. Okay, let's go down to the boardwalk. So the interesting thing here is there's also, so we have a little pond, and there's like historically a spring that was in this area. And so there's a cypress, the bald cypress, that is, because it needs water for these knobby knees, and that's its growth habitat. So this is a young bald cypress, and there's an older one there. There originally was one that grew to be, this big around and was 250 years old, and then eventually in the early 20th century it died and it was replaced. But it's neat to see the cypress here, and it's because of the terrain and the water. And you can see the swing. People get so much joy out of that swing.
Everybody loves to swing.
Everybody loves to swing, but there are not that many swings like that anymore. And oh, look, it looks like somebody built something over here. So this is new. I have not seen this before, but like, we do keep sort of brush piles, so, for habitat for snakes and different things and decomposition, but like, clearly someone has made this structure, which is really fun. And I mean, like, that's the making part is a huge part of, this was a living farm. People using the resources of the land to...
Did they have a permit to do this?
I don't think so. I do not think it's a permanent
Where's the building
structure.
Department? We need to get we need to get someone out here to make
but
sure
I think
this...
it's like these loose parts, right? And it like organic stuff, and making shelter and playing around with ideas and things is pretty, increasingly it seems like kids are stuck on, like, here, do some Minecraft. Here are like 50 different blocks you can use to build things according to the block world of how you have to be blocky. And like, this is none of that. This is like, I'm just gonna, more and more and interconnected and building and, kind of messy, but really dynamic. That's exciting. Think of all the worlds that are in there, right?
The tree's got a cool hairstyle.
It does. It has a good hairstyle. It's a mullet, I think, actually. It might be a mullet. But like if you actually look at all of the living creatures that are in that, it's hard to even call it a stump. Like there's a universes in there, just in there. In all of these logs. And, you know, I don't know, I find that quite beautiful in and of itself. So I spend a lot of time like looking at the world through the screens, right? And like looking at LinkedIn profiles and grants and conferences and making all these dots and these maps that it is like a geography, but it's not real. It's not, I mean, it is of real things, but is a constructed reality in a digital space. To a certain end, and I'm choosing to do that, but you don't want to get lost in that, because in some ways, if you stay in that world, it's almost like the people who are enacting this vision, this transhumanist, automata vision where there's some central controller that's controlling society and systems engineering everyone to some end, that it's happened or it's a done deal. And then you come out here and you realize, no, it isn't. This is real. Like, look, there's like fluff floating all over the place. You know, we have fluff and we have rot and we have possibility, and there is a vital energy in the exchange of life and death and reproduction that can't be replicated in computer code. It just can't. And so it's never going to happen. You know, I said, like, the scent of the black locust blooming in May, like, you can't put that in virtual reality. And then someone said, well, yeah. And I said, well, but if you could, it's beautiful in that it's not all the time. You wander into this fragrance and you're like, this is amazing, what a gift. If you could just dial it up whenever you wanted, it would not be the same thing. It wouldn't be the same experience. So I think the serendipity, the cycles of life, for me, it's always grounded me, but I think even in terms of understanding like natural energy versus artificial energy, it helps to disconnect and reconnect into nature. Because when you're in nature, like, your life is connected to these larger systems that are bigger than you and have gone on for millennia, right? It's so much bigger.
There's a relationship.
Yeah, there's a relationship, and it's a relationship in cycles that are ongoing in an affirmative way, in a caring way, in a generative way. And it's not this sort of rigid binary structure that exists in a digital world. It's a different kind of energy. Look at all the fluff. Isn't it magical? You're not going to be able to get on camera. But it's magic. It's like coming out of the trees. I don't know where it's coming from. I don't think we have cottonwoods here. But it is. It's like, look, you can't just call this up. This just happened. This is a gift to us. This is saying we're doing the right thing. Actually, it is. That's pretty marvelous.
And then that Avatar, they had those things coming down from the tree, but they were like living.
I'm not thinking about that. Look at this. Look at this. These are babies. So this is life. These are seeds. These are seeds on the wind, and then this is a cycle right here. And we're in it, right? We're in it. We're seeing it. We can be witness to it. We can be part of it. It's actually, wow. You can't put this in a movie. I guess we could try to put it in a movie, but like, this is, you just have to be here to see it, because it's pretty amazing. You have to see the little holes. So these are the other little things that live in there, right? The little birds and other little burrowing things that are bigger than the little ants and termites and stuff.
It's dead, but it's still useful.
It is. But is it dead, right? It has a function. It has a gift to give. I mean, look at this. Have you ever seen anything like this? I don't think I've ever even seen this happen before.
Really?
No, I have never seen this happen before. I take this as a good sign. This is the world saying, go forth. Imagine if all of these fluffs were people who started to get what was happening, right? And started to have agency about what was happening in the future. That would be pretty cool. And so here's another interesting story, a little bit of a story. This area, this lowland area, so we're at the fall line. So this little ridge, that's the fall line between the Piedmont and the coastal plain, this stone ridge. And so now we're on the coastal plain, and this is all jewelweed. But what we have a lot of down here is poison ivy. There's a ton of poison ivy in here, very robust poison ivy, so don't get in there. But jewelweed is used like a poultice to combat poison ivy. And so they grow together. And so like if you think about what we're sort of struggling in right now, like dealing with, is that like the medicine for the problem may be in proximity, right? Like there may be some connection of where to look. It may not be in the distance, it may be somewhere closer than we realize. Because maybe it's the dialectic, the problem and the cure, and how they relate to each other. So, but just like thinking about the space, so you can see that we're at this fall line here, and this is the rock. And, it's a real and solid physical thing. And, the house up there, it was built out of Wissahick and schist rock that was quarried. And people have left their mark, Edith. That must have been a while ago. But that in the real world, we're grounded, and there's actually like energy systems within the rocks that we're built on, and these anchor points in reality that are much more ephemeral if you're in a virtual space. So you have the plant material, you have the plant relations, but then you also have the stones, and the stones and the lichen and their relationships to one another. And there's just so much more to life if you have the eyes to see it in the natural world. And what's so special about this place is that it is a free place. You don't have to pay admission to come here. You just can come, and you can connect. You can see with your own eyes. We're not overly prescriptive about things. This is a space where you can come and find your connection with the land, and in a space in the city where that's pretty rare. And that we have a lot of parks. We have recreational parks. There are gardens that are more manicured to different ends. But this is a piece of land that is very much about the cycles of life, and increasingly looking at other knowledge systems, like not just a colonial lens, like very much scrutinizing that lens and looking at other ways of knowing the world through plants and the land, and the fact that it's accessible. And that we can do this. Like not that it's not a challenge to sustain this kind of effort, but it can be done. Like, we should do this for each other. We should totally be doing this for each other. And building connection, building that web of relationship in a space.
When you read about all the stuff that's going on, how do you maintain, do you get depressed or what?
I've had a lot of good fortune in my life. So I think to do this work, you almost have to have a bit of a distance from it. I think if I had a life experience of living through a lot of trauma, it would be really even more challenging. Not that people who have that don't have something important to bring to the conversation, and they totally do, but to actually look at it in an analytical way, in a way that doesn't tear me apart. Because of my life experience, I feel like I can do that, and I should, because I can. But it is a lot. It's a weight. It's a weight to understand the expanse of it, to understand how it's remaking the world into an anti-world and then it's hard, it's almost unbelievable what it seems like they're doing. If you didn't actually follow all the money, people would say, this can't be happening. I'm like, well, it's what they say they plan to do, and it seems like all of the various steps that we're getting there. And so to like retreat back, into sort of this meditative space of seeing, like going through the seasons and looking with like close eyes and like trying to see what teachings are out here, like in terms of larger, I know Robin Walcomer always talks about like humans being the youngest siblings. Like we really have no business to being the ones like messing everything up because we don't know what the hell we're doing. And that we should be learning from all these relations. So for me, it's a balance. It's my balance place. I missed not being here as much because of the lockdown. I mean, I can come back, but it's different. So I like the fungi. I mean, you can see, like, I don't know if you can, what your camera lens is like, but the colors are so amazing. The decomposers are important. So I guess
the posers and the
decomposers, right? But like, I mean, look at these. Look at the rainbow in here. It's just exquisite, and how it holds on, and like they're sort of collected together, right? They have this community going. They're doing this job of like breaking this log down into its components back to the humus, and so I guess that's sort of, if you think about what our job is right now, is that like the current system is not working, right? The current system isn't working for most people in the world. And so like I think many people are thinking about the system is collapsing, but if maybe what we should try to be figuring out as a way to decompose it in a regenerative way, right? Like I think some people are burn it all down, and I'm like, well, if you burn it all down, that burns us all down with it. Like, is there a way of gently decomposing so that we actually have something to build from?
Well, I was thinking that the thought of a mushroom stalk. Mm-hmm. There's like it's dead. It's like, right, isn't that kind of it's I don't know,
it's the fruiting body. It's the reproductive.
It's like is it like it's like building on the corpses of other.
Well, you have the network. I mean, the mycelia you have the underground network that exists for many, many, with much breadth before it ever comes to the surface as a fruit, the mushroom that you see. And so there's way more supporting that mushroom or the fungi that appears on the ground, under the ground, that you'll never see. But it's so green. I mean, that's the thing about the seasons here. We're really lucky. We have 4 full seasons. And up until a month ago, it was spring, so there were lots of blooming things, right? Lots of different kinds of interesting wildflowers, and those will still come, but right now it's so green, and we've had all of this rain overnight, and it's almost like you can just drink up the greeniness of it. I'm not an expert at plants, but I know a fair number of plants and trees. A lot of people have no knowledge of them, and I want to try to be better about like the qualities of plants, the medicinal aspects of plants, foraging plants, because I think, those are knowledges that were intentionally erased, indigenous knowledges as, part of the erasure of indigenous cultures in the United States, of how one could survive off of land outside of an industrial system, right? They don't want people to be able to survive outside of an industrial system.
Right.
And so that information had to be suppressed.
Inputs and outputs.
Yeah. And so, if this is the free gifts of nature, or the gifts that we should be reciprocal in, affirming the cycle of life with nature, but we should know our relations. And we don't these days. And when I was in school, and even when I started here, we had lots of school field trips. Kids would come for school field trips, and and this is a great place for a field trip because, like, you're not really going to lose anybody. It's not like you'll run off. Like in the zoo, I was always paranoid that the kid was going to like run off and disappear. It's like, no, you're here. Yeah, but you know, these days kids don't hardly even get any field trips anymore. Because first it was like, oh, it's too expensive, and now it's like it's not safe, or, you know. And then when the kids come, it's hard. They don't even know how to act because they don't get to go on field trips. So Philadelphia's water source came from the Schuylkill River in the 18th, early 19th century, and on where the art museum is now, they had a giant reservoir, and so they would divert water up into the reservoir to treat it, to have drinking water for the city. And so what that meant was that they created the park system on either side of the river to protect the watershed, boating, to protect the watershed of the city. So they bought up the land on either side of the river to protect the watershed, and that became a large parts of Fairmount Park, and the 18th century houses were these country houses. But then right after the intake for the water, essentially it was free game, and every most wretched industrial use you could imagine was just south of what is now the art museum. So the abattoirs and noxious industries, and so the lower Schuylkill was always this heavily industrialized area, like from the later, you know, mid-19th century on. And so this was all super toxic, and then it became sort of the center of petroleum refining. So on the other side of this river is like one of the largest refinery systems, although it's being closed down, is my understanding, after a terrible explosion. So they're like, okay, now, I mean, we thought it was going away before, and then fracking came back, so then we had all the fracking stuff that was processed through the refinery. But the river is actually, it's a tidal river, and it has up to a 6-foot tide. So we'll see if the tide's up or down now, but it looks like it's pretty high. So this is the river. There's a lot of trains on the other side, so you can hear like squeakiness. So I guess it's mid-tide. You can see the pilings that are out. These are pilings from docks. And let me see. Yeah, no, yeah. So one of the things that I like to do is when the tide is out, you can like go mudlarking. So further down is all of this glass from like trash barges that would like tip over, and glass would come up. But there's a lot of old pottery here, and little mussel shells and different things that are in the embankment. And you know, it feels like, you know, you're connected to these larger systems of history, right? You know, you're picking up this blue and white 18th century pottery, and that, you know, we're connected to all of the people who came here before and who were on this land before, and this obligation to try to make a difference, to try to make the world better. And you know, I was, you know, we had talked before about Standing Rock, and you know, that I knew some folks who were there the day that it was raided, and I came down to this river, like opposite the refineries, which we could see better further down, but there's gas tanks, to sort of acknowledge our interconnectedness, that Philadelphia is a center of this, like this refining industry, that these fracking trains, that these trains that were like would be connected to these pipeline systems, like we all have a responsibility to each other for that. And you know, while I couldn't physically be present, at least putting myself forward as in an intentional way to understand that connection and to sort of offer a little bit of thought and support of those actions against a militarized corporate state, which is what it was. You know, that's one of the memories I have of being in this space. You know, and it's an ongoing struggle. You know, we're one of the few parts of the river that has, isn't bulkheaded, that has a natural bank. And so because of that, like we also get a lot of trash. And so there are people who come out and keep cleaning it, you know, clean, because the storm overflow, anything trash that comes through the city, like can wash up here with the tide. But, you know, people are really committed to keeping it clean and keeping that natural space, because so much of the river is very artificial and channeled. And so I guess maybe that's another of these metaphors, right? Like sometimes unconfined life is messy, right? It can be not beautiful. It can be not what you expect.
Yeah, I have a friend that has a yard that's just got like all kinds of stuff growing in it, and it looks like unkempt. It looks like it's messy.
Yeah.
But there's like, it's so diverse, and it's done that way intentional.
Yeah.
But some of the neighbors are like, oh, you need to manicure your lawn. You know, you need to like clean this place up and like make it look all nice. And
it's like, what are the value systems, right?
Right.
And I think, so I was reading a book, I think it's called Black Shoals, and I need to spend more time with it, but they were talking about shoals, these sort of underwater gravelly areas that were submerged, but like not the full depth of the water. So you could stand on them and not be submerged yourself, but you might not see it from the surface. And the way in which these shoals would disrupt traffic, like disrupt shipping, and provide like a liminal space, like a space between that wasn't quite land and wasn't quite water, and conceptually the possibilities of what could happen in such a space. And I do feel like in some ways this area with the river and the tides and this natural fluidity of mud and stone and water and sometimes trash and different things, it's this dance and this interplay, and that there's like moving forward as everything becomes more and more tight and locked in and rigid, is thinking about like looking for those spaces where that fluidity can happen, because I think that's where the magic is going to happen. Like that's where things that are unexpected and liberatory can happen, is in those kind of spaces. So I was thinking about the tidal Schuylkill, and that we have the 6-foot tide and back and forth, and that things are revealed and things are concealed, and that it is a fluid space that has sort of mysteries in it and possibilities, and also some messiness in that sometimes we get litter that comes in. And as things become locked in with these blockchains and these systems, how do we continue to seek out the spaces of possibility and the spaces of fluidness to find the magic, to find some portals into other opportunities that might not be available to us if we only looked at the world through a really structured way. And that thinking about the river and thinking about these cycles, the tides on the land, is a way of like a tool to use to think about, to keep that in mind so we don't get locked in. There's a lot of glass. Oh, look here. Here's a bit of pottery. It's not fancy. So I love doing this. Do this with my kid when I can get a chance. But just to look and see what's on the riverbank. So there's we have this older glass. It's not beach glass exactly, and then we have this pottery, which is probably at least 19th century, if not, there's probably 19th century ceramics, a couple of pieces. And then we have styrofoam, which doesn't ever go anywhere. And then we have the little mussel shells. So in this space, you have all of these things, all of these time periods intermixing. And there are these pieces, and what can we build off of the pieces, right? Knowing the pieces of these histories, where do we go? Where can we take these pieces? What pieces do we carry forward? What pieces do we bury? What pieces do we try to clean up? And that's what I love about this place, is that it's layered and it's complicated. And it embraces the complexity rather than trying to make everything one way or the other. So this is a cider press, and it was carved right in the bedrock. It was created as a press for apple cider. And so the apples that were grown would be placed in this bin, and there would be a stone that would smush the apples into pulp. There would be a stick that would come up and push the stone around, and then they would scoop up the pulp, and then they would put it on that pad and press it down and get more juice extracted, and then that was fermented for apple cider.
When was this made?
I mean, it's mid 18th century. So it's been around a long time. Imagine what it would take to carve out something like this without power tools. And, these days we're conditioned to expect that everything is fast, right? Everything has to go fast. Everything is changing faster than we can manage. We can't even stop and think about it because there's just speed. And And when you come to places like this and you think about the time frame that people put in, the commitment of physical effort to construct infrastructure, it's very different. It's a very different time frame. And you know, and this for them, you know, was about food sovereignty and about, you know, sustainability and supporting themselves off the land. And you know, that's one of the things I think we're struggling with right now with all of these lockdowns is, what is our food system going to look like? How do we sustain ourselves? How do people support their family's basic needs of, you know, how do we address hunger within an economic system that is increasingly predatory and predicated on not good food systems, right? And disconnected food systems from local systems and the land. And I don't know, a lot of people really like this. It's very unusual. It's a very unique thing, but I think it speaks to both the time frame, the commitment of creating something by hand, and what it means to have a connection to the food that you create for your community, and having some autonomy over that is really important to think about. So, and you can kind of see in the distance in the river, that's some of the pilings from the old piers. So again, it's this liminal, what's submerged, what's visible. Maybe there are things you can't see. In this intersection between industry and this little tucked away piece of nature, and now we're sort of getting to post-petroleum. And you know, the other piece of this is they're looking at redeveloping a lot of this area as a tech, sort of biotech or like light manufacturing, advanced manufacturing corridor. And you know, a lot of that is bioengineering, and we think about, you know, what does it mean to commodify life and engineer life? It's all, there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of interesting questions that can be asked here and discussed. So it's a place that's both, you can be physically present and physically on the land, but also intellectually is very interesting to think about the history of this land, the land that was of the Lenape people, and then how it was used later by the Swedes and by, you know, John Bartram and within a colonial context, and what the preservations of that meant based on his life and his importance in the world that was deemed important at the time, and that, you know, maybe the importance that's happening now is time for a different set of knowledges, right? And I think that's something that we're really intentionally surfacing, are different knowledges about this place that are much broader than what the Bartram family themselves, which while they did very many significant things, it's not limited to that. So this is the lower third of the garden, and it's mostly there's a farm and there's an orchard and there's a wetland. It's a walnut tree. I was weeding in the kiwi bed this week, and I pulled something up that was like a tree growing out of this thing, and I was like, what is this? I was like, is it an avocado pit? Like, it was clearly something like large, and it was a walnut. It had never really occurred to me what a tree sprouting from a walnut would look like, but that was it. It was over there in the kiwi bed. You know, and that's a food source, right? The black walnuts. This object that's out in the river, it was part of an art installation with a houseboat, and it was upriver, and during a storm it cut loose and it floated down, and now it's kind of stranded out there in the middle of the river. But it's still growing things. I don't know exactly what's growing in there, but it's growing some things. And then you have the liquefied petroleum in the backdrop. You know, when I was looking at this the other day, thinking, like, in this moment that we're trying to figure out how to navigate what's ahead and how to preserve and protect, like, other ways of thinking about the world and other ways of developing alternative futures. And, you know, while sometimes it feels overwhelming, the fact that if you have, like, a node out there that is holding fast to these ideas, like building on that, and then maybe just finding other things that have floated loose from other things and collecting them together. And then you don't start out giant, you start out small and sort of firm in your situation, and you know, and yet it's also in this larger system, right, of tidal, you know, navigating all that. This is going to be my responsibility for the season, I think, is the kiwi berry trellis. So we've been cooped up, you know, in the lockdown with stuck inside most of the time. So now a lot of our focus for staff, even staff who normally have desk jobs like me, we get to actually be out and do things in the garden, which is really exciting. So this past week, I know it doesn't look totally cleaned up, but it actually is much better than it was before. There was tons of thistle. You can kind of see all the piles. This is all the weeding I did out of this garden bed. Some burdock, and it was really exciting to try to like sift through what was to stay, what was to go away. You know, a lot of these weeds have really deep runners underground, and trying to get as much root as possible. And I talked a little bit about like radical solutions and this idea of like needing to go to the root of the problem. Like if you're weeding and you have runners under the ground and you don't actually get to the root of the problem, the weeds will come right back. And so that was really like when you think about the land teaching you. So these are Jerusalem artichokes, which we had forgotten. This is something was planted and then forgotten. We're like, what is this? There's like a tuber on the root. I don't know what this is. And then we realized, oh yeah, that was the Jerusalem artichoke. So these are strawberries. So I, you know, pulling out all of that. And then I pulled out a bunch of mugwort. There was a bunch of mugwort in here, and it's an herb that's supposed to be good for dream retention. So I thought, well, that sounds interesting. Maybe this is a gift of the weeding to me. So I gathered up all of the mugwort and I'm drying it. And I'm going to make a little sachet, a little dream pillow to take home, and that'll be the gift.
You take a photo of it? Is it a mug shot?
Actually, so I had got the mugwort, and then, but these are poppies. So like some of these are self-sown, and they're just, I don't know, it taught me a lot just to be physically present on the land and physical, right? Because these days a lot of people there are many people who do very hard physical labor jobs. I have not done that work in a long time. And so it was very good for me to engage in that practice of both focused work for 4 or 5 hours, just weeding and being in connection to the land. And then one of the days, it was a beautiful day, there were all of these little garter snakes, which are my favorite little friends in the garden. And one of them was actually curled up right in this strawberry plant. And I was sitting like right there, and it was just curled up it was way overgrown with weeds like this. So it was way, and I started pulling the weeds out, and then I realized, oh, here's this little snake. But, we're kindred spirits here in the kiwi berry patch. So this is the interesting thing about this place. At key points in its history, people stepped in to save it. One of the first environmental lawsuits in the country was here. They were putting a railroad down to Baltimore, and the railroad company just wanted to run it along the river because it was the cheapest way, is to just run it right along the river. And they were like, no, this is too important. You actually have to put it back behind the house. And so they ended up having to build a very giant stone retaining wall that was very expensive to reroute the railroad around Bartram's garden. So that was the first time. And then later, when in the 19th century, there were a lot of bankruptcies, and Andrew Eastwick, who was a railroad baron, he bought Bartram's garden, and he built a giant Victorian mansion on this hill that we're going to go up to. And like all giant Victorian mansions, it burned down. So it isn't there anymore, but he made his fortune in building railroads in Russia. But he saved it. So he kind of saved it as his pet project. One of these trees, oh gosh, what is it called? Medlar. One of these trees is a medlar, which is like a medieval fruit, which is really interesting. You have to wait till it's almost rotten, and then you eat it. And see, they have the little plants at the bottom for the pollinators to pollinate the orchard. So that's what the plants are there. And this is one of these gifty things. So in the spring, they come through and they prune the orchard, and you get these little trimmings of the orchard. and say in like late February, March, and they bring the cuttings into the office, and then you put them in a vase, and then they bud out. So you have like little cherry blossoms, like vases of cherry blossoms in the office in the late winter, and it's so cheerful. So this is where the Eastwick Mansion was, and now it's where we have a wedding tent. Although this season it doesn't seem like we're having weddings, unfortunately, but it was on that hill. The Bartram house, like, it had some of the first columns in North America, so that was an art piece that was done, and it's kind of like a bench. The garden is in Southwest Philadelphia, and it's an area that has experienced a lot of environmental impacts from the refinery. It's a low-income community, and it has a lot of uses, industrial uses, that are not good for the community that surrounds it. And so this actually used to be a parking lot for a school bus company, Yellowbird school buses. And what has happened is that, you know, in the 17 years, the school buses no longer work. We no longer provide school buses, and now it's a scrapyard. And the scrapyard, you know, on the one hand, you know, it recycles resources, so that's one thing. But if you actually look at it, most of the scrap in here, beyond like the cars that are out on the street, it's small scale scrap, like small appliances and like small pieces of metal that individual people who do not have other better economic options are like bringing in shopping carts. And you can see like the suitcase is probably used to haul metal, anything that they can find, you know, to try to get by in this new economic model, which is based on these uses. And it's hard to imagine the negative impact of people who live opposite this. In the moments that everything is rushing by and we feel like, you know, we can't slow down, we don't have time to think or react, like when you're in a space like this, you know that you do. You can carve out that time and carve out the intention that I think many forces are interested in, just keeping us distracted and keeping us disconnected from each other and from nature. We all feel a little bit like a little beat up, but we're still shining, right? Still doing our best to shine.